scripture lesson this morning in the Old Testament is from 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 32 to 49. It's the familiar story of David and Goliath. Everyone has heard that from Sunday school days on out. To set the stage a little bit, the Israelites and the Philistines were frequently at war with one another, and on this occasion they were lined up opposing each other on the valley, across the valley of Elah, which lies to the west of the Dead Sea a ways. And the narration begins when David comes to watch the proceedings after Goliath has taunted and challenged the Israelites. David said to Saul, "Let no one's heart fail because of him," Goliath. "Your servant will go out and fight this Philistine." Saul said to David, "You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you're just a boy, and he's been a warrior from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant used to keep sheep for his father, and whenever a lion or a bear came and took a lamb from the flock, I went after it and struck it down and rescued it from its mouth. And if it turned against me, I would catch it by the jaw, strike it down, and kill it. Your servant has killed both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, since he has defied the armies of the living God." David said, "The Lord who saved me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will save me from the hand of the Philistine." So Saul said to David, "Go, and may the Lord be with you." Saul clothed David with his armor. He put a bronze helmet on his head and clothed him with a coat of mail. David strapped Saul's sword over the armor. He tried in vain to walk, for he was not used to them. And David said to Saul, "I can't walk with these, for I'm not used to them." So David removed them. Then he took his staff in his hand and chose 5 smooth stones from the wadi and put them in the shepherd's bag in the pouch. His sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. The Philistine came on and drew near to David, with his shield bearer in front of him. When the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was only a youth, ruddy and handsome in appearance. The Philistine said to David, "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. The Philistine said to David, "Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and the wild animals of the field." But David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This very day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. And I will give the dead bodies of the Philistine army this very day to the birds of the air and the wild animals of the earth, so that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and all this assembly may know that the Lord does not save by sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand." When the Philistine drew nearer to meet David, David ran quickly towards the battle line to meet the Philistine. David put his hand in the bag, took out a stone, slung it, and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. Thus ends the reading of the word.
Well, as we continue our sermon series looking at the life of David and the lessons we can learn from the life and stories of King David, we come to this one, which is maybe the most widely known story of David, the David and Goliath story. We love the story because, America's all about the little guy going up against the big guy and winning. How many movies have this theme? Countless movies have this theme. We love it in sports, and often sometimes maybe the Beavers feel like the David in this story, right? Going against the underdog, going against the big Goliath teams. Although it's all a matter of perspective. If the Beavers football played George Fox football, then who would be David there? But we are loving this story of the little guy going against the big guy and winning. The thing is, we spend a lot of time rooting for David, but then we spend a lot of our energy trying to be like Goliath, trying to be the big powerhouse, trying to be the winners, and trying to be the ones that are unbeatable. This summer, as we learn life lessons from the life of David, we learned last week to never assume that just the most powerful or the best looking or the majority would always be the ones that God would choose to do God's work. That God looks at the heart, not at the outward appearance. And we connected that a lot because of our many of the current events in our nation to not assuming based on the color of skin, and not assuming what people are like just based on the color of their skin. But we can also, I think, draw from that lesson last week when Samuel chose David and anointed him to be the next king, that we're not always to assume about ourselves. We make a lot of assumptions about ourselves. Oh, I don't have the talents for that. Oh, nobody really wants me involved in that. We put ourselves down or take ourselves out before we even try. I think it's important to not assume that God is in fact calling you to step in, to use your talents, even if you don't feel so confident that you indeed are one called by God to bring your gifts and talents to God's story in this world. This story, I want to look at the heart of this story on a personal level of facing Goliath in our world. We face challenges. We don't often, hopefully, go into battle, and yet we do face giants. We face figurative and challenges in our life that seem like Goliath, that scare us, and that we don't know how we're going to succeed or overcome these challenges. So from this story, I want to David picked out 5 smooth stones to go up against Goliath. So I'm going to give you 5 things we can learn from David in this story that help us in succeeding in life and going against challenges. First, David has made peace with ordinary time, with his lot in life. He was the youngest. He was the one sent off to be the shepherd. And he was okay with that. He did not need to be in the forefront getting attention. He was okay being alone with his sheep, protecting them. He knows how to put his own needs and desires to one side for an extended period to do hard and often unambiguous work. That's what David does in the first part of the story before we read about Goliath. He looks after his father's sheep. He takes provisions to the various commanders, the army. That's what he was doing going to this battle, was he was sent to take grain to give to his brothers, to give to commanders so that they would have provisions. And so he was okay with that lot in life. He attended to it. He did it well. He put everything into it to take and be okay. That life sometimes may seem mundane, but to look for the joy in serving in ways that often aren't lifted up or often aren't exciting. We, in our life, in our everyday part of life, often are doing things that are unrewarding, unregarded, or sometimes unattractive. Most of you will doubtless spend some part of your life, or already have, caring for young children, or being unemployed, or recovering from surgery, or doing a job that has no glamour or no acclaim. And that's when you face your defining moments. Face who you are, how you respond to that. To learn the rhythm of the everyday and practice it with faith with no need for constant excitement or flitting from one thrill to the next, but able to simply be faithful in the everyday, mundane duties of life. David finds a way to make the ordinary into a source of pride. Is able to turn the everyday into a way of training for the little challenges he faces in the everyday. Really do train him and help him for this moment when he faces a giant. It's especially a time for him out there as a shepherd to connect to God, to see God in what he is doing and watching over the sheep and see his part in that. Brother Lawrence is a monk who wrote a wonderful little book called Practicing the Presence of God, and he talks about finding joy in washing dishes. How many of you take joy in washing dishes? Some of you do. Yes. Those who raise their hands see us about being part of our fellowship committee. But in practicing the presence of God, there's ways to see God's presence even in those mundane, everyday tasks, and seeing how God works in our lives and can teach us things even in the mundane. The second thing that we could take from this experience is that David is comfortable in the world. He's comfortable out there in nature. He's comfortable out there with his sheep. He knows nature. He goes up against lions and bears. David doesn't rely on technology or physical advantage. He's small. He spent his life outside. He knows how to keep sheep. He knows where to find smooth stones. He knows how to craft a sling out of leather. Goliath has no idea about these things. So if you want to be like David, get outside. Some tricks you can never pick up in a laboratory or an office. Some tricks you need to be outside learning from nature. He learns his wisdom from the animals, from the owl, the cunning of the fox, the agility of the wildcat, the sharp eye of the eagle. I spent a lot of time in the outdoors as a kid. My parents were big into taking us backpacking, and then I was in Scouts. And I can still say that so much of what I learned came from those times out in the mountains, backpacking, through with my family or through Boy Scouts or through my own trips, just being outside and learning from nature. That's why I was attracted to be a camp director, and Christina and I directed a youth camp, because just getting kids away from the technology and the screens and being in community outside in beautiful nature has just a powerful lesson for them to connect with who they are, to get out of the distractions, connect with who God is, and learn what we can from nature. This is called natural revelation, that God does reveal a lot of who God is through creation. And we can learn a lot about ourselves and about God. And so that's my plug for sending kids to camp. And not just day camp, but overnight camp. It's a good thing. Third, David knows himself. And this is so vital. Saul assumes David should be as much like Goliath as possible. He should be as much like the other soldiers, like his brothers, as possible. So he gets him a full set of armor and a bronze helmet and a coat of mail and a hefty sword. And David tries to walk in it, and it's just clumsy. It's not who he is. It's not what he knows. And if he had gone out like that, he would have been defeated easily by Goliath. But David, he entertains Saul and puts it on, but then he says, no, that's not who I am. I know who I am. I know what I've learned, and I'm going to go out there just as I am, with my sling, and I'm going to get 5 stones. David knows who he is. Are you trying to wear somebody else's armor? Are you feeling heavy because you're carrying the burdens of somebody else's expectations in your life of what you should be? Have you been through that experience where you've had to shed those expectations and those burdens to really be able to embrace, no, I know who I am, and it's not who so-and-so expected me to be? So don't try to be a second-rate version of somebody else, because God made you the way you are, because God wanted one like you. David knows there's no point on putting on Saul's armor. And Saul might think he's being disrespectful or taking unnecessary risks. He might be letting down Saul, but David knows there's no use trying to be Saul. David knows his own weaknesses, and he knows his own strengths. Important there, knowing not just your strengths and what you're good at, but your weaknesses. David knew he wasn't a good hand-to-hand combat fighter. He knew what he was good at. He knew what his strength was with the sling and the stone. You know, it's interesting that we in our school systems often have this factory model of just trying to give every kid the same education and plug them through, when so many people learn in different ways. And it doesn't really work for all kids, so the kids who respond to that succeed and do well. But the kids with struggles, the kids who don't learn in that same way, the kids with learning disabilities, often, if they aren't identified and met in a different way, struggle. Because we're all different and needing to know who we are and turn those struggles into successes. It's interesting that an extraordinarily high number of successful entrepreneurs are dyslexic. A recent study by Julie Logan at the City University London puts the number of entrepreneurs who have dyslexia at about a third. That's extremely high. It includes the most famous innovators of the past. Richard Branson, the British billionaire entrepreneur, is dyslexic. Charles Schwab, the founder of the discount brokerage that bears his name, was dyslexic. Cell phone pioneer Craig McCaw, David Needleman, the founder of JetBlue, John Chambers, the CEO of Cisco, the technology giant, the founder of Kinko's. Those are just a few. In fact, a speaker one time at a meeting of prominent university donors, most of them successful business people, on a whim asked how many had ever been diagnosed with a learning disorder. Half the hands went up. Because entrepreneurs have to be creative, right? And so because they struggled with reading and finding and the normal way of learning, they found ways around it. They learned to be creative and found ways to be successful, giving them that entrepreneurial spirit. And so even knowing our weaknesses helps us to look for the ways that we can be successful. And it's not always going to be the way society or parents or friends or media tells us is the way to be successful. So knowing yourself, knowing your strengths, but also knowing your weaknesses. Fourth, David knows who his God is. David knows Goliath is not God. Goliath is the reality in front of him right now, and it's a big reality. It's ugly, it's intimidating, it's scary, but David knows that Goliath is not his ultimate reality. The ultimate reality is God. Unfortunately, Christians have lost so much respect in the world, especially in our country, and trust of people of other faiths and people of no expressed faith, because I think Christians have tried to turn Jesus into Goliath, a big bully, powerful, scary, intimidating. Whatever your view of truth, faith or no faith, Goliath is not God, and David knows that. David knows where the secret of the universe lies, and it's not with Goliath. It's not with big, bully, scary, intimidating strength. That's not how we succeed. That's not how Jesus succeeded. That's not how Jesus taught. And it's not how our church can succeed. Not by being Goliath, but knowing God. Knowing God is a surprising God. Knowing God is one who looks at the heart and would choose one like David. Knowing that God will work in ways that are upside down and topsy-turvy. Knowing that God works through mercy and love and service, not through strength and the sword and power. Fifth, David knows what power fundamentally is and what our power is. And it's a combined of all these first four. These first four of knowing life, the ordinary rhythms of life, and being okay with it and learning from those times. It's knowing the outside world and nature and how the outside world works. It's knowing yourself and who you are as a unique individual created as you are by God. And it's by knowing God and knowing the nature of God and the heart of God. Those things together come and give David his power to succeed as he faces challenges. Strength comes not in Goliath's bravado, but in David's skill with the sling. Not in Goliath's muscle, but in David's faith that God will be with him. Not in Goliath's plausibility, but in David's truth. Not in Goliath's armor, but in David's wisdom. The wisdom to approach this challenge in a different way. David lost sight of that power later on, and we're going to hear about that this summer, but most of us do for a season in our life. And when we lose sight of that power, then precisely that's the moment that we're drawn to Goliath. Because in the end, Goliath's problem is not that he's too strong, but that he's too weak. He may be big, he may be scary, but he becomes an easy target. He's not quick, he's not smart, and he only knows one way of fighting, only one way of approaching a problem, and he's not able to adapt. And often we become like Goliath and we get fixed. We were successful one way, but when a challenge comes to face us, we're not able to see and do things in a different way. So we combine all these truths together, all these lessons, and hopefully that helps us face our problems. To know that our times in our lives that seem unglamorous are times to learn. To know that the things we can learn by the world and the outside world help us learn how to approach problems. I always love seeing how robotics is the next big thing, right? How they're basing some of these robots on birds and bugs and insects. They're learning from the outside world. To know ourselves, to work on self-awareness and know who we are, know what our weaknesses are, be honest about them, know what our strengths are, be humble about them. To know God, to listen to God, to know the heart of God, to study that God is not a Goliath, but God works in the quiet ways, in the humble ways, and in ways of service and mercy and sacrifice. And then finally to be able to weave all those together, to face problems in our life. So as we face our Goliaths, as we face our challenges, may we learn. Hold on to those stones, not literal stones, no one should be throwing rocks, but hold on to those stones of truth and to help us face problems as we face them. I'd say finally together to know that you're not alone, that you have a body of believers, a church, people to surround you, and that we have strength in the fact that we are compassionate and calm and surround each other when we face challenges. May we do so, and may we do so with faith and with thanksgiving. Glory be to God. Amen. Let's bring our prayers to God as we are united with one Spirit.